Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment from very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. The 2025 legislative session is underway. The first day is in the books at any rate. Day one is typically filled with a bunch of procedural votes and ceremonial stuff and general political pedantry. New legislators and new legislative leadership are sworn in, and there's the customary thank yous and attaboys and general backslapping. But nothing breaks up the tedium quite like a challenge to leadership decisions on the very first day. At this point, the only thing that really could have been challenged were committee assignments in the Senate. You see, in the House and the Senate, they work a little bit differently. In the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House chooses all of the committee chairmen and makes the assignments to each committee, and that's that. The Senate, it doesn't work that way. The President of the Senate chooses the chairman and then assigns everybody to the committee, but it is the body of the Senate that ratifies that decision. Therein lies the rub of it for the Wyoming Senate. Even though Bo Beitman is a pretty conservative guy and he's now the president of the Wyoming Senate, he gave 7 of the 10 committee chairmanships to straight-up redcoats. He could have picked from the 15 or 16 pretty conservative people in the Senate, but instead, he chose 7 people with demonstrably liberal voting records. The one in question on yesterday's opening session of the Wyoming Senate, new Senate Health and Labor Committee Chairman, former Redcoat Speaker of the House, Eric Barlow. This decision, at the very least, is curious. The Health and Labor Committee, in either chamber, is the one that handles most pro-life legislation. So theoretically, if you're a conservative president or Speaker of the House, you would want somebody that's pretty conservative to head that committee. But not, apparently, in the 2025 iteration of the Wyoming Senate. Senator Eric Barlow, according to Evidence-Based Wyoming, votes with the Democrats 82.9% of the time. 82%. According to WyoRhino, Eric Barlow only rates 50% according to the Wyoming Republican Party platform. According to WyoVote, Eric Barlow is the 11th least conservative member of the Wyoming Senate. And to throw in a ratings agency that's nationwide and not just based in Wyoming, according to the Institute for Legislative Analysis, who are the guys that used to do all of the scorecards for CPAC, Eric Barlow only rates a 47.9%, which is, for all intents and purposes, the score of a solid Democrat. And this isn't just a new thing for Eric Barlow. This is representative of his entire career in the Wyoming legislature. However, it's not quite as simple as that when it comes to pro-life legislation and Eric Barlow. His overall record with pro-life legislation is, at the very least, interesting. We begin this morning in the cow pie in an article entitled First Day Fireworks in the Wyoming Senate Over Abortion, Pick for Committee Leader, written by none other than Trotsky Wolfson. This most recent example of bovine fecal matter says, and I quote, during the committee confirmation process in the Wyoming Senate, which has historically been a relatively procedural process, a call was made by Senator Larry Hicks to reject Senate President Bo Beitman's nomination of Senator Eric Barlow to be the chairman of Senate Health, Labor, and Social Services Committee because of his stance on abortion. Barlow's voting record appears to be consistently pro-life. Hicks told the the Cowboy State Daily, that when Barlow was House Speaker, he kept certain abortion bills in his drawer and sent others to committees where they wouldn't have a chance of passing. End quote. There's a couple of different things at play here. First, an absolutely sophomoric view of Hicks's motion would assume that he actually thought he could remove Eric Barlow as chairman of Health and Labor. Given the makeup of the chamber and the results of the leadership election, it was highly unlikely that Hicks would be successful in his motion. Larry Hicks has been involved in Wyoming politics for long enough to know when something actually have a chance and when it is absolutely doomed from the beginning. Yesterday's move had less of a chance of passing than a pro-life bill making it out of Eric Barlow's drawer when he was Speaker of the House. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. We'll continue with the program in just a second. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. And somebody's got to pay for this adventure down in Cheyenne. Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by Morton Buildings. If you're in the market for any type of metal structure, whether it's a garage or an outbuilding or maybe something bigger like a roping arena or a gigantic warehouse for your business, the two guys you need to talk to are Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. They are the experts in metal building construction. They've been doing it longer than anybody else, and they definitely do a much better job than anybody else. So it doesn't really matter what type of building you're thinking about. Give Nick and Jesse a call. Their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Today's program is also brought to you by the Wyoming Cartridge Company. My friends, nobody's liberty is safe when the legislature is in session. That's why you should make sure that you're protecting your Second Amendment rights and stocking up on as much ammunition as you could possibly acquire. My pals at the Wyoming Cartridge Company sell ammunition by the box or in bulk in a variety of different calibers. I burned through several boxes of Wyoming Cartridge Company ammunition, and I can tell you for a fact that it holds a pattern just as tight as any other ammunition that you'd get off your shelf. To find out more information, go to their website, wyocc.com, or pick up a box of Wyoming Cartridge Company ammunition anywhere that you get your sporting goods. And now, back to the program. First, here's part of what Senator Larry Hicks said on the floor of the Wyoming Senate yesterday.
Mr. President, I will be making a motion, and I want everybody in this body to know that. The motion that I'm going to make is not based on malice, but rather it's based on my own moral convictions, my sincere belief in fulfilling my oath of office as a senator in the state of Wyoming. Mr. President, pursuant to Senate Rule 8-6, I move to appeal to the body the decision of the President to appoint Senator Barlow, Chairman of the Labor and Health Committee, on the basis of the following, Mr. President. Mr. President, Chairman, Committee Chairman, have the prerogative and the power under our rules and our regulations to block or draw any legislation that is assigned to that committee. We also have the ability to manage and assign bills to the point that we can run out the clock. Many of you have served as chairman. I've served as chairman. It's not an uncommon practice to end up with some bill in the bottom of a drawer. Mr. President, while our colleague certainly has the experience and has demonstrated the skills and the ability to serve as the chairman of a standing committee in this body, I find it only the Labor and Health Committee objectionable for our colleague to serve as chairman of that committee. Mr. Chairman, I predicate that on the fact that we all have long voting records that have been here. The Labor and Health Committee is the committee where bills dealing with the question of life of the unborn are assigned. My colleague, which I respect but I vehemently disagree with on this issue, has a long voting record of supporting abortion, which is antithetical to my own values. It is antithetical to the moral laws of our country as defined by our founding fathers. Members of the body, our founding documents are unique amongst the world. There's no other declaration or constitution that recognizes the fact that there's a higher law than man's law, and that law comes from God. That among those powers, the of the earth and the separation of equal state to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. Amongst those laws are the right to life. And government's first and most important duty is to protect those God-given rights. Members of the body, if you've ever had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., I would encourage you to go to the Supreme Court of the United States. On the outside of the East Pediment of the Supreme Court of the United States is a relief of Moses holding the Ten Commandments. As you walk into the Supreme Court and you go to the chambers, on the oaken doors to the Supreme Court of the United States are the Roman numerals 1 through 10. When you get into the court, above the heads of the justices is carved a marble relief in stone containing the Roman numerals 1 through 10. Between those is two allegorical figures representing the power of government and the laws of law, the laws of God. Each and every day in the Supreme Court of the United States, they start out with God save the United States and the honor of the courts. Mr. Chairman, that Roman numeral 1 through 10 represents the Ten Commandments handed down by Moses. It is a basis and a foundation of our jurisprudence in this United States of America. One of those commandments, Mr. President, is commandment number 6. It says, "Thou shalt not murder."
He went on for several more minutes, and really, it's probably one of the better speeches that I've heard Senator Larry Hicks give. But I think that you get the point. There was no way that Hicks's motion was going to pass, so the intent, rather, was to object to the appointment of Senator Eric Barlow as chairman of Health and Labor. The other reason why Senator Hicks made the motion is so that everyone in the Wyoming Senate was on record supporting a guy who really isn't all that favorable to pro-life legislation when he's the chairman. And that's the really interesting part of Senator Eric Barlow's record. The truth is, when it comes to voting for pro-life bills, he votes in favor of them more often than not. But the reality is this is one of those issues that you're either in favor of protecting the unborn or you're not. It's not something that you can be in halfway, and if you'll pardon the pun, it's a lot like being pregnant. You either are or you aren't. You can't be kind of pregnant, and similarly, you can't be kind of in favor of the unborn. And this is where you really have to pay attention to Eric Barlow's record. He's been in the Wyoming legislature since 2013, and since that time, there have been a ton of pro-life bills that have gone through either the House or the Senate. And to get an understanding of what Eric Barlow does with pro-life legislation, you have to go all the way back to 2013. And the first pro-life bill that he actually had an opportunity to vote for was House Bill 97. This was the original heartbeat bill. It would have outlawed abortion after a fetal heartbeat was detected. Eric Barlow voted against it. Curiously, in 2014, there wasn't any pro-life legislation for Eric to have acted upon. But in 2015, on House Bill 156, that would have required information on ultrasounds be given to a patient. Eric Barlow, again, voted no on it in committee. In 2016, and perhaps this is where Eric Barlow got the idea that he could put pro-life legislation in his drawer, then the notorious Speaker of the House, Kermit Brown, put every single pro-life bill in his drawer, and they didn't see the light of day. That's a lesson that Eric Barlow wouldn't forget, and he'd file it away for his time when he was actually in leadership. After 2016, Barlow's actual voting record, when he actually had to be on record and vote for or against a pro-life piece of legislation, his voting record gets a little bit better. But don't forget, just a couple of years prior to that, he voted to allow abortions even after there was a heartbeat. In 2017, Eric Barlow voted for House Bill 116. That would have prohibited the sale of fetal tissue. That same year, House Bill 132, the reporting of abortions, came before his committee, House Health and Labor. What did Eric Barlow do? And tell me if this is familiar. He put it in his drawer, and that bill died right there in committee. That same year, Barlow voted for House Bill 182, which is the bill that would have mandated information be given to a patient on ultrasounds before an abortion. It's also interesting that this is the same bill that he voted against all the way back in 2015. In 2018, there was a pro-life bill that he voted for, Senate File 21. And then 2019, there was House Bill 103, that was more reporting of abortions. That same year, he voted for House Bill 140, which would have required a 48-hour waiting period before receiving an abortion. The only other piece of pro-life legislation in 2019 was House Bill 302, that would have created a penalty for failing to provide informed consent to a patient. That one was put in the drawer by Steve Harshman, who was then the Speaker of the House. In 2020, there was one piece of pro-life legislation. That was House Bill 197. It was, again, the 48-hour waiting period. And Barlow voted for that one, too. So again, his voting record, and as the cow pie correctly points out, it looks as though Senator Eric Barlow is largely pro-life, which, again, I don't know how you could be largely pro-life, but anyway, it is what he did as chairman and as Speaker of the House that ought to concern everyone in Wyoming. This is the main reason that Senator Hicks gave for his objection to Barlow's appointment as chairman of Health and Labor. When Eric Barlow took over the Speaker's gavel, he proceeded to stuff every piece of pro-life legislation that he could into his drawer to make sure that it never had a chance for a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. In 2021, House Bill 70, which was another informed consent bill, he put it in his drawer. Now, in 2021, there was House Bill 161, which outlawed discriminatory abortions. He actually voted in favor of that one. The abortifacients bill from that year, he put it in his drawer. There was the trigger bill from 2022 that would have outlawed abortion in the event that the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. He voted against that bill being introduced on the floor of the House. When they lost that vote, and it did come to the floor, Eric Barlow did vote in favor of it on third reading. That same year, House Bill 149, which was the same discriminatory abortions bill, Eric Barlow put it in his drawer. Also in 2022, there was Senate File 83, another abortifacients bill, which he also put in his drawer, and it didn't hit the floor for a vote either. In 2023 and 2024, Eric Barlow had moved to the Wyoming Senate. There were 3 abortion bills that he could have voted on, and as he did point out on the floor of the Senate yesterday, he voted in favor of House Bill 152, the Life is a Human Right Act, as well as Senate File 109, which was Tim Salazar's abortifacients bill, and in 2024, House Bill 148, which was a regulation of abortions bill. That's the one that the governor vetoed. Eric Barlow also voted in favor of that. So it's not really Eric Barlow's voting record that is of concern here. It's what he does when he's in a position of power to affect the pro-life agenda, which is the very first thing that Senator Larry Hicks brought up in his objection yesterday in the Senate. Every time that Eric Barlow has been the chairman, or if he's been the Speaker of the House, he's made a concerted effort to kill pro-life legislation. And let me just put that another way. Chairman and the House Speaker, or the President of the Senate for that matter, have the ability to prevent any piece of legislation from even coming up for a vote. So it's actually even a little bit worse than voting against a bill. You're preventing everybody else from voting on it too. That's what Eric Barlow does, and it's also what Senator Hicks was objecting to. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Larry Hicks's motion was doomed to failure from the very beginning. Given how the leadership election and the committee assignments have gone, there was no way that the Senate was going to remove Eric Barlow as chairman. That wouldn't have been part of the deal that was made that installed Tara Nethercott as majority floor leader and those 7 liberal committee chairmen in the Senate. The resulting vote from Hicks's motion was 28-3. It was only Senator Sherry Steinmetz, Senator Larry Hicks, and Laura Pearson that voted in favor of removing Barlow as chairman of Health and Labor. There were a couple of senators that always vote against any of these procedural motions, but what the resulting vote shows you is that the majority of people in the Wyoming Senate are completely on board with all of the liberal chairmen, Tara Nethercott as majority floor leader, and Bo Beitman as president of the Senate. We'll have to wait and see what happens next, but if this is any indication how the session is going to go, there's lots more fireworks for us to watch in the future. Well, that'll do it for today's installment of Cowboy State Politics. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again on Saturday during Weekend Update. But for now, from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.